Welcome to the Linguistic Validation Café series, a place to gather, connect, learn, and grow together by creating community, embracing our cultures, and sharing our passion for linguistic validation. This is the space and time we take to embrace diversity and discuss how to improve the human aspects of medical translation. In this third episode, called Beyond Medical Translation, addressing cultural sensitivity in linguistic validation, we're going to talk about why language matters in cross-cultural adaptation to promote inclusion, diversity, and empathy for better patient outcomes. With our expert guests, Rachael Lee and Silvia Codo. Well, hello and Happy New Year, everyone. I'm so glad that we are here together this 2025 for discussing super interesting topics related with linguistic validation. And today we have as a special guests Rachael Lee and Silvia Codo. Hello, Rachael and Silvia, welcome. But we also have our group of linguistic validation consultants and former and current students from my linguistic validation training program at Art of Diversity, and they are responsible also for creating this podcast. So thank you so much for being here and for all your amazing contributions. For those of you who don't know what we do here, well, this is a group that discusses linguistic validation and shares in a very, let's say, easy manner and informal way. The intention is to grow together and to connect and create community and embrace our diversity and our cultures, and also contribute to the linguistic validation and clinical outcome assessments science. So in the end, to support the well-being and improvement of health of patients. And that's really our main goal. So today we are going to talk about cultural diversity, cultural adaptation within linguistic validation and medical translation, of course, which is a very sensitive issue, let's say, and really part of the nuances that linguistic validation has and what makes it very challenging. And I'm going to be introducing to you now more specifically Rachael and Silvia. And Rachael Lee has been providing French to English language services to regulatory authorities, pharmaceutical companies, hospital research departments, CROs, NGOs, publishers, academic institutions, and patient associations in Europe, Canada, and the US for over 30 years. She particularly enjoys translating patient-facing clinical trial and regulatory documents. She has been working in linguistic validation for around 15 years and has recently added cognitive debriefing to her skill set. Rachael produces high-quality work and has a keen eye for detail and manages tight deadlines with ease. When she's not translating, Rachael manages a collective of young jazz musicians, DJs, sustainable fashion designers, photographers, filmmakers, and tattoo artists, which aims to overcome social isolation and promote diversity and equity while reaching new audiences. Growing up in the UK with a multicultural background, cultural sensitivity, diversity, and representation are issues very close to her heart. So super, super welcome, Rachael. And Silvia Codo is a medical translator working in the English to Italian and Spanish to Italian language combinations with long-standing experience in the localization of life sciences content aimed at both healthcare professionals and patients. Her work as a forward translator in linguistic validation projects prompted her to enhance her professional skills by completing Art of Diversity's specialized course in linguistic validation. This training has prepared her to deliver precise and culturally appropriate content and manage each step of the linguistic validation process. Her involvement in the arts as an actress, dancer, and volunteer at the local theater company allows her to interact with diverse people and situations, enhancing her cross-cultural and intracultural awareness and sensitivity. Thank you. Thank you so much for being here today, Silvia.
Thank you.
Well, it is really amazing what you do, both of you, and all your cultural background and so much richness. And I hope that this is going to provide beautiful insights to all of us. Well, we have called this episode Beyond Medical Translation, Addressing Cultural Sensitivity in Linguistic Validation. And we're going to find out why language matters in cross-cultural adaptation to promote inclusion, diversity, and empathy for better patient outcomes. This is really a huge topic, and we are not going to be able to cover everything today, for sure, but it's going to be an invitation to start a conversation that will proceed in different episodes along the way. And I wanted just to add before I ask you some questions that we have prepared. When we consider, in relation to cultural sensitivity, right? When we consider inclusive language, we become sensitive to belonging and to the need for every member of a society to have a place and be integrated. And our language reflects our cultures, and this belonging needs to be mindful as well of preserving equity and diversity. The three together help integrate individuals and collectives in a healthy manner into our societies. At least that's what I believe. And I wanted to ask you, why is the cultural dimension important in translation, and why is it particularly relevant to medical translation? Because we know we do linguistic validation, but we are doing medical translation. And before we dive into the specifics of linguistic validation in relation to cultural adaptation, why is the cultural dimension important in this case? Maybe Silvia, would you like to begin?
Okay. Well, the cultural dimension is relevant to all translation fields. And this is because translation is not just a transfer of words from one language into another, and it is not about finding equivalent words in the target language, but translation is about transferring meaning from one language and one culture into another language and another culture. And the way we convey this meaning is crucial, because in this process, we as translators act as cultural mediators. And we have to be aware of how the words we use will be perceived by the target audience in order to ensure that they are relevant to the target audience, they are accepted by them, and that they don't cause offense, or that they don't misinterpret the original. So it's all about finding a balance between being faithful to the original and creating a text that can be relevant and acceptable to the target audience. And sometimes this could be quite challenging. And well, these aspects are particularly relevant to medical translation, and especially to the translation of patient-facing texts. And this is because these texts speak to people without medical training. And so this means that we have to use a plain language, and a language that can be understood by as many people as possible. And in addition to that, patient-facing texts speak to patients. And this means that we have to use a language that is respectful, that is empathic, and that does not create stigma, because patients don't want to be told off, and they don't want to feel judged by anybody. And this task can be quite challenging too, because we may not know how people with a certain condition may perceive some certain words. I don't know, maybe a word that, or a phrase or a question that sounds perfectly neutral to us may sound offensive to a person with a certain disease. And so we, as medical translators and as linguistic validation consultants, we have to be aware of these challenges, and we need to have an open mind and the ability to acquire inclusive thinking in order to overcome all these challenges. And this is one of the reasons why I think that in linguistic validation, cognitive debriefing plays such an important role, because it gives us the possibility to get direct feedback from patients, and we can speak to them and understand how the words we used in the translation are actually perceived by them. So
and we talked about cognitive debriefing in our previous episode with Tomislav Gerzig, Natalie Nikova, and Kaha Monahan. And so if anyone is interested in checking out that episode, we dive deep into that. And yes, for sure. Thank you so much, Silvia. I agree with you. And Rachel, would you like to expand on what Silvia?
Well, I think Sylvia summed it up perfectly. I think culture is the very heart of translation, and as translators, we're bridging the gap between cultures. And this applies to all translation in general, but also medical translation, where you're reaching patients that might find themselves in very, very vulnerable situations. So we need to be able to communicate in patient-friendly language that avoids stigmatizing patients, that is encouraging and positive. And because by doing this, if we're empathetic, this can have a really positive effect on patient outcomes. It needs to, the language, it has to be culturally appropriate for the target audience. So we kind of have to put ourselves in the patient's shoes to interpret the words, as the patient. And like Sylvia mentioned, cognitive debriefing can be super important. For instance, as an example, I can think of the word clumsy that came up in the MS questionnaire that I did with Nur. And when Nur asked me if I found anything that was potentially insensitive in the questionnaire, I couldn't think of anything after reading through at first. But then when I came to paraphrasing a question, did you feel clumsy? It was only when I was thinking of alternatives that I realized that clumsy isn't exactly the kindest way of putting it, because it can make the patient feel bad about themselves. So thinking of more kinder ways, such as, did you have difficulty with your coordination? I think it comes down to looking at the tiny details, in the text, and just making sure it doesn't have a negative impact on the patient. And I recently also, a patient recently mentioned the word phobia to me. It was, actually in the word photophobia. And they said it made them feel really uncomfortable because it didn't really capture how they were physically feeling. For example, they felt that photophobia should really be described as intolerance to light, because it's a physical inability to be in the presence of light, rather than phobia, which can be described as an irrational fear. And I think it's so important to have patient feedback. It just makes you look at words that seem innocuous, that seem perfectly harmless, but it just makes you see them in a different way. If you look through the patient's eyes, you know, if you look at things in a different way. And I think that comes through empathy and
yeah, I see that, for example, when in linguistic validation, we are working with different types of documents, and specifically with what we call clinical outcome assessments, which are these instruments or questionnaires that patients are going to be filling in, expressing how they feel, function, and survive. And what I see, I wanted to quote Joshua Maslin, which I liked. I saw a webinar that he was participating in, and he talked about cultural diversity in clinical trials, and he mentioned that multiple studies have confirmed that conducting clinical trials with a diverse range of ethnicities, genders, ages, and lifestyles is essential, since these factors can impact a treatment's effectiveness among different groups. And in the United States, for example, legislation like the 21st Century CARES Act has recognized this fact, calling for greater clinical trial diversity. So this is let's say, in a scenario where it's not only let's say, our mainstream cultural nuances, but specifically we're embracing more and more diversity in different aspects. And this is going to ask from us much more cultural competency, let's say. And mainly in linguistic validation, well, as you mentioned, we are dealing with patient-facing texts. We are dealing also with clinician-facing texts, but as well, the way clinicians word the different conditions, or how they express those things to patients, even if it's in a very high register language for them, it also impacts. So yeah, I think a revision of how we express medically, either for clinicians or for patients, taking that into account, it's really part of our work as linguistic validators, let's say, and also as experts in our own culture, right? So we are diving into linguistic validation in relation to this. And can you think of more examples, like of cultural adaptations? Maybe some of our colleagues would like to join us in the conversation, and because first of all, for everyone listening, I would like to invite you to think about an anecdotal cultural issue that you have encountered in your career as a linguistic validation consultant, or as a medical translator, or as a medical writer, and maybe just add it in a comment, and it would be very, very interesting and enriching for us. So any one of you would like to start and give an example?
Or perhaps I can give an example.
Oh, okay. Wait, give me a moment. I will add you. Oh, there you are. Hi, Tomislav. So nice to have you here.
Something we just discussed, I mentioned during the break room sessions with Eva and Vanessa. I remember two examples from my work. Two different questionnaires, both were targeted for children. One of them was, I remember, for the Norwegian language. And one of the questions asked, so it was about specific ankle conditions with children, so whether injuries of the ankle or inflammatory conditions. And the question was, did your condition disable you from enjoying playing in the park? And the Norwegian people involved in the project said, oh no, that doesn't work in Norwegian. We don't play in the park. We play on the playground. We walk in the park. And yeah, it's no big issue, but it was important to grasp this concept of a leisure activity outdoors, which is completely irrelevant whether it's a park or if it's a playground. And the second example was not so much perhaps a cultural, but maybe, but it's an example of an outdated question actually. So they were asking kids about something about their social media use. I can't remember the exact question, but as an example of social media, the questionnaire has MySpace. I'm not sure how many people remember MySpace, and I don't think it even exists anymore. So during the linguistic validation, we adapted this to more recent contemporary examples, like I don't remember, but it was Instagram, Snapchat, perhaps Twitter in some countries. I'm not sure. But it's also it's also a good example of us needing to be up to date, to be able to grasp the intended concept, because of course the researchers aren't interested in someone's use of MySpace. They want to measure something else.
Oh, okay. Yes. So nice examples. Thank you. Thank you so much. Would you like to add anything else or any comment, Rachel and Silvia, regarding to what Tomislav just said? Well, first, I have one before I forget. You mentioned outdated questionnaires, and for me that's very important, because in truth, any questionnaire prior to 2009 maybe has not been developed taking patients in mind. So that's a good thing to take into account, because I don't remember the name of the act, but in relation to the FDA, there was, like, from 2009 onwards, this idea of patient-centered clinical trials and so on, and all those questionnaires. Questionnaires developed now do cognitive debriefing with, of course, the people with the condition and so on, and questions such as what's meaningful for patients and so on are taken into account. And also translatability assessments are performed during the development, which we will be talking about translatability assessments in other episodes, but are directly related with cultural adaptation, right? So yeah, I think that's one of the issues we encounter many times: outdated questionnaires that we need to adapt, and so many things need to change because we don't do that anymore, or they just write a letter, or or yes, there's just many nuances in relation to that. So thank you so much, Tomislav.
Yes, talking about outdated questionnaires, I have a recent example, because some time ago a client asked me to analyze the results of cognitive debriefing interviews. I didn't do the interviews, but I had to analyze the results. And in that case, they were migrating into electronic format COAs that was translated some years ago. And before migrating it, they wanted it to go through cognitive debriefing to check that there were no major issues in the translation. And in the Italian translation of that questionnaire, the form used to translate adjectives, which can be either masculine or feminine in Italian. In that translation, they used only the masculine form, whereas today it is common to use both masculine and feminine forms separated by a slash, or maybe use some neutral forms. And I was happy to read that all the people interviewed during cognitive debriefing noticed that, and they all suggested changing the masculine form with a more inclusive one. So I think it's a good example of how sensitivity changes through times, and of the fact that questionnaires that were developed or translated some time ago need to be updated. because they have to be adapted to changes in culture and language over time.
Yeah. That's really a very, very important issue because it asks from us also to be very up to date with our culture and in many aspects that maybe normally we would not be as much interested, but because of the work we do, we need to be very, very quick in sensing, right, all the cultural changes that are taking place, and not only in our own culture, but specifically, let's say, in the US culture or English-speaking countries where most of these questionnaires are developed, and we need to be aware of that culture, know it deeply, to be able also to transfer into our own. So that's a very, very interesting issue. And I know that Rachel has an example of this, let's say, changes through time. And can you give that example?
Yes. Well, I was doing some work last year on eating disorders, and I was really shocked to see that the name of the questionnaire used to diagnose patients was called the SCOFF questionnaire, SCOFF. I was really shocked. And then I looked into it, and it was developed back in 1999. So I guess it was a time when maybe the questionnaires were lacking in sensitivity. There was perhaps less attention to these issues back then. I mean, it's an acronym for S, do you make yourself sick or vomit because you feel uncomfortably full? C, do you worry that you've lost control over how much you eat? O, have you recently lost more than 1 stone in a 3-month period? And F, do you find yourself to be fat when others say you are too thin? And F, would you say that food dominates your life? I mean, I think there are a lot of issues with this questionnaire. I think, you know, I don't know if there's a way to have questionnaires updated, but I find that so offensive to and insensitive to people with eating disorders, because it's really derogatory, I find. So that was the example that really struck me.
Yes,
recently.
yes. Thank you, Rachel. Yes, that's a very well. It would need a lot of adaptation, right, on our part. And this, well, it's taking us to the important topic also of taboos that I would like to tap into here as well. And what are the potential challenges for linguistic validators or medical translators in relation to taboos? And I would like if you can share some examples as well. Let's say with the issue of race that we have been discussing earlier, because for those of you who don't know, we have these gatherings and we go into breakout rooms and we share and talk about these topics, and then we come together here and share it with everyone else. And well, we've come up with some let's say issues that we find. So who would you like to share something about what you have been discussing in the breakout rooms? Anyone? Maybe you, Eva, or Natalie? Do you feel like? Yes, Eva?
Well,
Oh, Natalie. Okay.
At the moment, I can't think of any taboos for Bulgaria, for example, because the racial question is not a taboo here. Actually, you can freely ask anyone about his race and origin. But I can give some other examples from my personal experience. And I would add that first of all, I would like to point out the importance of the translatability assessment part as a preliminary part, which could detect a lot of cultural issues that could be avoided even the cognitive debriefing process takes place. And but yes, this is very important for me. And also here, for example, we don't use so much thank you and please. Only at the beginning we could say, please open this or do this. And afterwards, the interviews, they're tired of this word. If it is a kind of a taboo, I could say the word please is more like a taboo. Because the participants, they feel at some point they feel so tired of this repetition that they prefer to avoid it. And it is not because they're rude. It is because we just, it's in our culture and we don't use it so often. Yes, and also another important thing which I would like to point out here is the use of the metrics. In Bulgaria, we use kilos, kilograms, and kilometers and meters, and we don't use pounds or feet or miles. So if we use yes, miles or pounds, no one will understand this, and it might be some kind of a taboo, let's say, for us, more or less. Yes, and so we should always adjust the metric system to the corresponding language.
Yeah, because a taboo, in a way, it's also anything that threatens the values or ethics or even the existence of the community in one way or another, or makes it feel uncomfortable in one way or another. So I sincerely had never thought about maybe saying please or not saying please as a taboo, or metrics as a taboo, but I can understand that anything that makes the person feel discomfort in any way from a cultural issue, may be considered as taboo. It would be a nice thing to rethink about the definitions of taboos. Thank you so much, Natalie.
Thank you.
And Eva, you were going to share something with us as well. Yes.
Yeah, I can say something. I mean, I haven't had any experience validating projects or questionnaires yet. I'm a newbie in this domain, but when translating informed consent forms, there's always like this question about the racial background, ethnicity/race. And for me as a German, I always cringe when reading race, because it always, like, we have like historic trauma with that, and with the like obviously Second World War and Third Reich, and it's not officially a taboo, but as I said, it always makes me cringe, and I really wish that developers would keep it like in general. I think ethnicity said it all, and yeah, that would be my experience and my example.
Yes, thank you so much. We were actually discussing also, I was not in your breakout room, but I was with Barbara and Emmanuel and Silvia, and I think it was you, Barbara, who mentioned also this issue about race, and also I don't know, Barbara, if you want to expand on this. Thank you so much, Eva. Thank you. But Emmanuel mentioned something. Well, she's from France. She's a linguistic validator from France, and she mentioned that is in France, if I understood you correctly, Emmanuel, in France, it's, let's say, forbidden to use any word or anything that may mention the idea of race. And she explains yes.
Actually, what is illegal is to ask a respondent, a patient, a respondent, about its race or ethnic origin. But so, and it is in the law when you can have a quite high fine. The thing is, you can ask for an exemption, but it has to be asked one, it's each case has to be asked one by one. And it's usually, for example, you're translating document for a clinical trial. It's usually done at the very beginning of the clinical trial. So every time I translate something for a clinical trial asking for race, as a translator, I always ask the person, okay, is the client aware of this point of law in France? And have they requested already a formal exemption? And some clients had absolutely no clue, because it was not a problem in their country, so didn't have any idea that the law could be so different in another country.
Yes, indeed. And you mentioned here, because you put it in a comment, that failure to comply with these rules is punishable by 5 years imprisonment and a fine of 300,000 euros under Article 22619 of the French Penal Code.
Yeah, but you can ask for an exemption, and then you have to ask for an exemption, and it will be reviewed by la CNIL, la Commission Nationale Information et Liberté.
Oh my God, yes.
But I was surprised that some clients doing a clinical trial didn't know about that at the moment where we were at the translation of the questionnaire, so quite far ahead in the development of the clinical trial.
Yeah, that really makes it paramount to do translatability assessments, right? Yeah. Sorry, for those of you who don't know what because we are mentioning translatability assessment, but we haven't said it, but it's just we select different languages from different families of languages, and we let's say analyze the original questionnaire, anticipating different issues for the translation and cultural adaptation, and not only in linguistic terms, but also in cultural terms. And if the results of all those analyses show that some of the items need to be revised, it is, let's say, we ask the developer the possibility of modifying the item so that it will be cross-culturally acceptable. Yes, so in this case, also makes me think how artificial intelligence cannot anticipate something like this. And it's just another amazing example of our human need for being in medical translation and well, in all these processes. Thank you so much, Emmanuel. It's really, really informative. And I don't know if I remember we had a small conversation in relation to this. Would you like to add something, any of you, in relation to race? I know, Tomislav, you said something, but I don't know if you want to expand on what you mentioned in your country. Yeah, I got you.
It's not what we discussed previously was not related to Croatia. It was something. It was actually expanding to Emmanuel's note about the restrictions in France, and I just mentioned that in clinical trials it's perfectly common. Actually, every clinical trial I've come across with has requested the study staff to enter the information about the subject's race in the study CRF. So even for Caucasian people, it was requested to add tick a checkbox if they are of Latino origin, because it's common knowledge that drugs work differently in different races, and that's just something that's used for statistical analysis as a subset to also see to identify the effectiveness of the drug or potential safety issues of the drug within different races. So races do matter physiologically, because we are of different races. Different races do function physiologically apparently somewhat differently, because the drugs don't work equally or to the equal extent.
Yeah, that's very complicated, because if we are taking race into account for the clinical trial research or whatever purposes that the product in research has, and we have these limitations, how do we solve them? Let's say, Tomislav, since you have a lot of experience with, running many languages, projects with many languages and so on, how do you consider this? Do you go to the developer, explain this issue, and what solutions have you seen, or would you suggest? How could we proceed?
Well, to be honest, I haven't had any issues or come across such problems with related to race. But when it comes to cultural adaptation and the need for adapting the questionnaires to a specific country, in my experience, it's always good to check with the developer or the copyright holder and to ask for their input or approval for making such changes. Because although we do have a concept definition or elaboration guide document, depending on the company how they call it, but when you make such changes in the wording of items, you might introduce an error if you don't understand it properly, if you misunderstand the underlying concept. And of course, it's always good to have a second pair of eyes, especially if it's the developer or one of the developers.
Okay. Yes, because however we adapt this is going to change the way the patients are going to be understanding the questionnaire. And then again, it's going to have a huge impact in the results and in the drug development life cycle itself. So
we should always bear in mind that our work is in linguistic validation. It's related to, in the end, we are responsible for ensuring data comparability. Clinical trials are almost exclusively multinational, and we must ensure patients answering the questionnaire in different countries, different languages, different cultures, are that this questionnaire in all of these languages and countries is measuring the same concepts. That each item is measuring the same underlying concept. Only then the data can be comparable, and only this bears sound scientific evidence for the sponsor, who is, of course, after clinical trial ends, they are eager to go to the regulatory agency and ask for marketing approval, and they cannot do that without sound evidence, sound data.
Yeah, so it's true that really for clinical trial sponsors, language can no longer be a secondary cost. Really, it must be included in the drug development life cycle. Yes or yes. So
definitely,
yeah. Thank you so much. Well, I don't know if you want to add something else, Rachael. You had some more examples or things that you wanted to share with us in relation to empathy and inclusion. I remember.
I was thinking something came to mind just yesterday. Growing up in the UK in the 70s and 80s, there was a rhyme that went, "Sticks and stones may break my bones, but words cannot hurt me." And I think I looked into it, and it dates back to the 1800s. But I think we've come a long way since then, because, language, we know that words can build or build up people, or they can destroy people. And we need to be aware of this as translators. Language is incredibly powerful, and we have great responsibility to ensure that our work is not harmful in any way. And this sort of is more to do with changes in language over the years, in sensitivity, because I think it has come more to the forefront in communications. So these issues are increasingly important to avoid stigma, because stigma can be so harmful in patient care. And I was looking at things like, I was doing some work on obesity not long ago, and it was for a short animation. It was a very short script, but it took absolutely ages because I was working as part of a team. And it just, it took a lot of thought went into finding the right way of describing the people, and we just couldn't. We didn't feel comfortable just describing the patients as obese patients, but in the end opted for patients living with obesity. And this can also apply to so many other conditions like migraine, MS, conditions where you have flare-ups, because you're not defined by a condition or a disease, but you're first and foremost a person, a whole person, and you're living with a condition, and you do spend your life navigating the ups and downs, the triggers and the attacks. So it's really important not to define individuals by an illness, but look at the whole person first of all. And also, it was really interesting. I heard of a doctor talking to somebody who had an operation on their foot, and basically it's really important to encourage patients to embrace their limbs that they have problems with. Basically somebody had surgery on their foot, and the doctor said to help with their healing, they really had to embrace their foot, their new foot, and take ownership of it for it to become part of them. So I think there's so much going on, on a lot of different levels with looking at the human body, the way we perceive our bodies, the way humans perceive illness.
How we talk about our bodies, how we talk about illness influences and impacts the health of the person in truth, because when for example, we ask patients, when we do cognitive debriefing, we ask if there's anything offensive, right? And anything offensive can be in terms of age, in terms of gender, in terms of neurodiversity, in terms of directly cultural issues in the sense of being minorities, race, although we don't mention it, ethnicity, let's say. So if a patient is already suffering or worried or scared with their condition, and if in the questionnaire we are being aggressive, and this takes us to the notion of, for example, what I think it was you, Silvia, you wanted to talk about. You told me about all the language related to oncology and cancer, and the violence that is there in that kind of language, and makes patients feel like they have to fight. There's I don't know, an armory or something against, and that's. I can understand that rage is part of the process of a patient with cancer, but and that anger, right? But I don't know, this fighting vocabulary that maybe is not as helpful at some point. What would you? I would like a bit of insight before we close.
Yes, it's true, because if you talk about fighting, winning or losing, referring to a person who has cancer or any other disease, you kind of put some pressure on them, some anxiety. You put some responsibility on the individual, on an individual who doesn't have any responsibility at all. So it's not about winning or losing, but it's just about living your experience and your life with your disease. And everybody has a different experience with their condition, so we have to respect that. Maybe for some people it's okay to describe their experience as a battle or a fight, because they can find some motivation in that, but for some other people it may not be the same. So maybe in a one-to-one conversation, we have the opportunity to understand what language a specific person prefers. But when we are writing or speaking to a wider audience, we don't know that. So we have to use the most neutral language possible, the most neutral and the most respectful languages possible. And yes, I think that this is one of the biggest challenges that we have to face as medical translators, I think. Because we cannot anticipate and control how all the people from our specific community will react to our translation, to the words we use, but we can be aware of the areas that can be potentially sensitive, and we have to take that into account.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Well, with that advice and really nice suggestion for us as linguistic validation consultants or people working in linguistic validation, we are going to close for today this episode. And I don't know, Rachel, if you would like to add some other suggestions for people working in these projects that you may have.
Well, I think I wanted to mention the NHS in the UK has written some guidance called Language Matters, and the one that I read recently was about diabetes. And I think there's a lot of really helpful information in there on how well it's intended for healthcare professionals, but it's very interesting because it says how it's essential for us to recognize the impact of language, the impact it has on people living with various conditions, in this case diabetes, and the language it can have the power to either reinforce negative stereotypes, but it also has the power to promote positive stereotypes, and also thereby improve patient care and patient outcomes, and also improve the healthcare system. So I think I found that really encouraging to see that work is being done to improve the language used in the healthcare setting. So yeah, that's really great that, its importance is being recognized.
Yes, in truth, we have a very challenging position, because when we translate like this or culturally adapt, we are changing our culture as well, and we can be active, let's say, game changers in embracing and supporting more diversity, more inclusion, more awareness of differences and respect for other cultures, and have a real impact in patients' lives through words. No, we think that words don't have that much importance, but they do. They do hugely. So yeah, I really appreciate all the work that you are doing, and the rest of the group here, and all people working in linguistic validation and medical translation, because it's really challenging, and I really thank you so much for dedicating your lives to this profession. Thank you so much, Silvia and Rachel. It's been amazing, and thank you all of you who have also participated today. And well, I hope to see you again in our next episode of the Linguistic Validation Café. Thank you so much for joining us today, and especially to our community of the Linguistic Validation Café, since this is a joint venture and its creation is the result of all of us together. The Linguistic Validation Café is an informal monthly gathering within the Art of Diversity Linguistic Validation Training Program.